Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 p.m., so I think we need to get started here. This is a webinar about iC3D Suite, but before we dive in, just as all other webinars, this is being recorded, so if there is something that you missed or you want to review it later, then you should be able to do that without any problem. Because you were subscribed to this webinar, you'll also automatically get an email with the details of the recording and any other information that we want to share after the webinar. If you look at your GoToWebinar control panel, for those of you who are here for the first time, there is a section in there where you can ask questions. Please feel free to use that. What I'm going to do in this webinar is I will look at questions twice. We have two case studies that I want to focus on, as you've seen in the invitation. And I would suggest that you ask any questions that you have, simply type them into the GoToWebinar control panel, and then after each case study, I will take time, go through any questions and answer any concerns you may have. Okay. For those of you who have been here before, hopefully this time the audio is a little better. We have a different headphone and mic combination to test, and I'm hoping that the sound quality will improve and will not suddenly go away in the middle of the webinar as we've had before. So what are we going to do? And I'm going to dive right into that because well, it's supposed to be about an hour-long webinar, and that's going to be a bit of a challenge. I'm actually going to build two almost complete examples, and this is a bit of a challenge and something that is a little bit new for us as well. I'm going to try and build these examples pretty much from scratch so that you can see what the different steps are and that I can give some advice along the way. And I've tried to select two things that show off a number of different features from iC3D Suite, but the intention is definitely not to cover every feature in the product. There's much more, of course, and you're welcome afterwards to send us an email and see if we can set up a one-on-one session if you have other features that you want to see in more detail. The intention here really is to show how all these things work together and how difficult or easy it might be to build something. The first case is these apples. So what you have here is and I can't rotate it here, this is just an image in the presentation, but is a little tray, and it has 6 apples in there. It has been wrapped in plastic, and then it has some artwork on the plastic. So that's the first thing that we are going to build. And then the second thing is a tea package where we're, and I told you this was challenging for an hour, where we're going to build the carton itself with the artwork on it, and then actually the tea bags inside as well. So the two items we are going to try and build. We'll see how far we get with this, but that's the goal that we have. So let's start with the apples. I'm going to hide that presentation, and instead we're going to go to iC3D Suite, and I have a little folder here with some stuff in there, and that's really basic stuff. Nothing has been done yet on the 3D side, but you have all the material that perhaps came in from a client and something like that. So what I have here is an Illustrator file with some barcodes and some images on there. This is the artwork that needs to go on the wrapping plastic, and I already found a red and green apple model here. So those are the elements that I have. Nothing else is here yet. We have to build everything else. So the first thing I want is the tray actually to put these apples on, and there are different ways you could do this. I could do something with carton fold, but in this case, I chose the shape modeler because it's probably quicker for this particular element, and in that way, you also understand what that thing does. Now, the shape modeler is part of the template library. I've just dragged that on top of my scene, and then I get this thing. And well, that's the 3D model. I can look at this from the top if I want to, or from the front. And if I add another shape here, then the model changes. Now I have this kind of wheel, cogwheel shape at the top, and at the bottom I have a circle, and the rest goes in between those two. Now, the shapes I have here are not going to help me make an apple tray. So the first thing when you use the shape modeler is that you actually need shapes to use in there. And what I have prepared is, and that's something that I did in this case by simply measuring something that I had, the real object that I had, measuring that and then recreating that in Illustrator. So I simply have an outline of what I want, and the outline is about 185 at 128 millimeters in this case, and that's what I want for the bottom of the tray. The top of the tray is a little bit bigger, as you could see on the picture. So if I go back to here for a second, of course the top of that tray opens up a little bit, so it's a little bit bigger. But the beauty of the shape modeler in this case is that I only need one shape. And in order to use it inside of the shape modeler, I have this Illustrator file, and I'm going to say export, and we're going to call that apple tray, and I'm exporting it as a DXF file. Now, why do I rename it to apple tray? That is because the name that I give it there is also going to be used inside of iC3D Suite, so I give it a name that I want to see in the application, and then I just save that with the default parameters for DXF. It doesn't matter too much, and I can close this one, and in our folder we should now have a DXF file. So going back to iC3D Suite, see this little plus sign here that allows me to import that DXF that I just created, 185, 128. So it again shows me what the size is just as a verification. And then I can see that it imported something called apple tray, and it has that rough shape that I designed in Illustrator. And I'm going to start by assigning those two shapes. So I always have a bottom and a top element or cross section, and I just dragged that shape on top of that so that I now have, well, something that looks like what I designed in Illustrator. Of course, this is not a tray. If I want a tray, then it has to extend out, and then it has to have an inside. And in order to do that, I know that I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. In order to do that, I know that I need two more shapes, and we'll see in a second what we are going to use these for. And in all cases, I use the apple tray, so I still end up with a solid block of material in there. Now, the top one is okay. This needs to be the bottom one rather is okay. This is going to become the top one. You'll see that in a second. And as I said, the shape needs to go open at the top. And I can do that either by simply moving this with the mouse, or I can do it numerically. And in this case, width and depth are linked. So if I change the depth, that's the smallest dimension in this case, then iC3D Suite is also going to adjust the width. And I'm simply going to add some millimeters to there, 20 millimeters to be exact. And you can see what that did. That indeed gives me that shape that I want. Of course, these top elements are, well, you don't think that we need them at this point. I'll show you in a minute what we're going to use them for. But I have the basic shape that I want here. And if I go look at this from the top, I now see these two outlines beautifully centered in each other, so that's good. I also want to set the height of that tray, and oh, I did that well. So what I wanted was 27. That's almost exactly what I got there. And let me zoom into what is going on here. Now, these two are fine, but now I want to create an inside, and that actually means that this point should be at the same height as the other one, so also at 27. And I want it, see where it creates this, this border now, I want it to be just a little bit smaller than the outside point, and just to make sure, I'm also going to, I want to go the other direction, I'm also going to do this numerically. I could do this with the mouse free form as well. So this one I'm going to set to 46, and the other one is 48. That is pretty okay. Let me see whether I can grab the top one there. So that gives us something that creates this little border around the object, and then I'm going to create the inside of this. And that one I'm going to do freeform. You could do this again, you could do this with numerically, but I'm going to do that freeform because I simply want to create that little inserted or dented shape in here. So that looks like my little tray. Now, while we're not going to need this in this case, please remember to say save before you do anything else. And I could save this in the same location as where I have the rest of my stuff. And iC3D Suite saves that as an STD file, and that is a shape template designer file. And the advantage of that is if I now make a mistake, I can always simply load that and I'll get exactly what I have here. So I can get that shape back without any problem whatsoever. Once you hit this Add Model to Scene button, which I now did, you're lost. You've lost that connection. Well, in this case, we're not because it's what I wanted, but you've lost that connection with the template designer. And that means if you ever want to go back, the only way you can do that is by loading that STD file that we just saved. Now, when I import this model into my scene, it always gets this default material, and that's, of course, not what we want. So I'm going to go to my material library, and this was some kind of cardboard when I had, when I saw that, so I could say printed cards probably comes close. So now this is a little bit shiny, and it's a little bit red. It's apples, so it should be green. What I can do, of course, is open up the shape that I just created, and I have the material in there, and if I double-click the material, it gives me a material editor. I can change the shininess, and then I could change the color as well. And you can do whatever you want in terms of color here, but let's make something that looks a little bit, something like that. So just apply that. And that gives me an apple tray the way I wanted it. Now, I want apples in that thing. And it's important to remember what I will do next. And what I will do next is before I start to do anything with apples, I'm going to say save as. And I'm going to again save that in the same directory as where I save everything else. But I'm going to save this as an iC3 file. And the reason that I'm doing that is because it makes a lot of sense to create all of the different components that you want to compose. And once you've created them, save them as iC3 files. That kind of normalizes the whole process, and it will give you a number of building blocks. And you'll see this in this demo, you'll see it in the next one as well. So, and once I've created that, I'm going to close that, and now I have my apple tray ready. And the next thing I'm going to look at before I reopen that apple tray is whether I have a good apple to work with. And to do that, like I said, I already found an apple model online. In this case, I actually bought it from a website specialized in that. and I'm simply going to open that in iC3D Suite. Oh, I already ruined it. Okay, ignore. It's not going to have any texture, so that's no good. But let me see in my model library and go to fruit, and luckily I already imported it and then saved it into my model library as well. So this is an apple. I have different apples that I could add. It doesn't really matter, but what is important here is that this was a 3D model that comes from outside of iC3D Suite. You have the different materials that it imports with as well, and what I could do is I could, let me see, this is the material, perhaps make it a little bit less shiny, and maybe it's already kind of bumpy. So you can still, even though this was imported from outside, you could still modify or adjust the materials that were applied to each of these elements very easily. The reason, by the way, that it failed to import with the textures is because I copied only the DAE file, which is the Collada file itself, and I didn't copy the textures, which come separate in Collada documents as separate JPEGs in this case. So I copied this from another folder, and I inadvertently didn't copy the textures with that. But like I said, once you've imported that correctly, you can add that to the library, and then you can just drag it from the library afterwards. Now I'm going to inspect this a little bit because I want this to fit in my tray. So if we go to transform, this will tell me what the dimensions are of that object. And well, we knew what the dimensions were of the tray, and because we want to fit 6 apples in there, it's kind of easy to figure out what we want. And in fact, I'm going to have to rescale this one a little bit. And what I want is about something that is about 70 millimeter, so 7 centimeters wide and deep. Now I can do that very easily by saying scale altogether, and then I could step back here until I'm at 70, or I can type in 70 and then it will jump to that automatically. So I could do this, or let's take that one there. So that's scaled it down. Another important lesson is I've now added a transformation to that. If I go back to scaling, you can see that it has these transformation details. What I can do now is I can say reset, and we're going to do that a couple more times. And then I have 2 options. Reset transforms would put everything back to the unit transformation, which would undo the scaling I've just done. That's not what we want. But I can also go for bake transforms, and that takes all of the transformations that I have done, and it bakes them into the object. And if I now go back to transforms, you can see that it is at 100%. So that transformation is no longer there. That scaling that we did is no longer there. It has actually been calculated into the different points of the object. The reason I'm doing this is that because it will simplify the model once we start combining things together. That becomes very important in iC3D Suite. So this is the apple that I want, and remember what I just said. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it back into the same area where I did before. This is my apple, and that will give me 2 components, the apple tray iC3 file, and then once this is saved, the apple iC3 file. So let me close this one. So that gives us a tray. It gives us an apple, but we want a tray with apples. So I'm going to open up again the tray. Now it looks like it is positioned a little bit random, but if I press the F key or I do view front, that's the same thing. This is how it is actually oriented. So this is what iC3D thinks is the front of the object, which is perfect as far as I'm concerned. And now I'm going to import my apple. And of course, it doesn't line up correctly, but we can fix that very easily. But before I fix it, I don't need one apple, I need 6 apples. So I can select the apple that I have here, and then with that apple selected, go to duplicate. And in duplicate, I will say that I need 3 apples wide and 2 apples deep. I need 6 in total. Just apply that, and that gives me the apples that I want. Of course, they still don't line up correctly where I want them, so I will need my transform tools. This is moving, and I'll zoom in a second to do this in a little bit more detail. If you press the Option key while you're transforming, if you press the Option key, see what happens. Every time I press the Option key, that transform thing disappears, and that means I can rotate my model with the mouse. If I let the Option key go, it comes back, and I can continue modifying that. And that's it's very, very helpful when you're trying to put something in the right position. So that might be close. Now they're levitating a little bit, so I don't know many apples that can levitate, so let's take them down. Look at the underside of this carton, and then, oops, too much. Yeah, so that is better. Now let's see if we have a breakthrough on the carton somewhere. No. Looks like my apples could have been probably just a little bit bigger, but not much. But that gives me a pretty good positioning for the 6 apples in there. Now, there is one more problem. This looks very artificial, and the reason it looks artificial, of course, is, well, because I have the phones to give you a better experience, and in the end it doesn't seem to help very much. Let me try again. Okay, so we haven't quite figured out why the sound problem is there in the first place. At least I have a better headset in meanwhile. So as I said, we've rotated this a little bit to give you 6 unique apples, and that looks much better. But I also created a problem because my apple is a little bit too big, and because we're only interested in the visual effect, I'm simply going to cheat a little bit and say, this doesn't work in real life, of course. You can't, well, you can squish apples like that, but then you probably don't want to eat them anymore. In this case, it will do just fine. I could reposition some of the other apples to give them a little bit room, or move them about a little bit to make it look even more random. So you can continue to play with that, but it gives you a good impression of what you can make with that. And just to eat my own dog food here, I'm going to say save as, and we're going to call that apple tray with apples, or something like that. The name by itself is not that important. What is important, again, is that you save this step in the design, so that if something goes wrong at some point, you can come back to it later without having to redo too many steps. We're just going to let this save. Takes a little bit longer here because, of course, the computer I'm doing this on is not the fastest. But also, I have 6 apples now. Each of them has textures and so on and so on. So altogether, that takes a little time to work with that. Okay, so that gives us the apples, and now what we are going to do is select all of that stuff and go into templates and go to shrink wrap and add a shrink wrap on top. And then in the shrink wrap side, I have a preview here that shows me that this is wrong. I need a horizontal wrap, and I know that I have a design with a cut length which is this dimension in this particular case, where the plastic is cut off. I know that I have a design that is, if I'm not mistaken, 240 millimeters. So I'm going to make that 240, and I'm going to create a little bit of an overlap, and the overlap is shown there. And now I seem to have a lot of extra plastic on the sides, but that's actually not too bad. If I use the right material, and this is a horizontal wrap, so I'm simply going to use one of the default horizontal shrink wrap, and I start simulation, then you'll see that that material will contract very quickly around the tray and around the apples that you want, and that's exactly the effect that you want, because these shrink wraps are designed to keep the apples stuck to the tray and all of the apples together. So it needs to actually shrink a little bit around the apples at the top. Okay, let's give this a little bit of time to go there. Now I can already see that it's going to be a challenge to finish this in an hour, but I'll do my best. There is no longer a setting to show you which percentage of the shrink has been done or anything like that. The only thing that you need to do is look visually at when you're satisfied with how that looks, and this is starting to look pretty okay, especially for this demo. So the little bulge that I had here is almost completely gone. So that means I'm going to stop the simulation. And once the simulation is stopped, then we're going to add this to the scene. And at this point, iC3D Suite will redo the calculations will use the calculations that it has done, and it will use those to create an extra object in this scene. And the extra object is, of course, the plastic that is around all of these apples. Okay, so what I have now is the apples with some plastic around it. The only thing I'm going to do is go to my material library, select the plastic, and in here I have something called crinkled plastic, and that looks a little bit better. I could fix the shine. It's probably way too shiny. The same way I did for the apples and for the cardboard, I could fix this so that it's less shiny. But I'm not going to do that right now. The only thing I'm going to do here is go in. Normally I would save this step as well, but because we're short on time, we'll take a risk, and I'm just going to go straight into Illustrator without saving the intermediate step in there. Because the only thing that is left now is for us to add artwork to this plastic wrap that we have. Now you can see that Illustrator in this case opens up two files, and that may be a little bit surprising, but there is actually this strange thing, which is artwork that you could add to the shape modeler. That's the tray that we have in there. We're not going to do that in this case. I am going to add artwork to here, which is the shrink wrap. And you can see indications of where the center is. You can see indications of where the overlap of the shrink wrap will occur as well. So that should be 5 millimeters, and this is going to be 5 millimeters as well. And like I said in the beginning, I have a file for that. So let me go into artwork and open that up. And let's just select all and copy. And we're going to copy that in here. And I want some rough positioning somewhere like there, but a little bit more in the center of the design, something like that. And now I can do update now. This is the plugin window, as you remember, that makes the link between Illustrator and iC3D Suite. So I'm updating that, and it shows that it has the artwork on here. Now this is not positioned totally correctly, but you can see the point. There is a lot of deformation, of course. This is probably where I'm not going to be able to resolve everything, and that's because of the stems of these apples. The plastic here has been shrunk to quite an extraordinary amount. So I'm not going to be able to fix everything, but I do want to go in and, for example, let me try with this thing here. If you want to undistort elements on a shrink, it's very important that you don't select everything and then do what I'm now going to do. You have to look for clusters of elements that belong together, and preferably that are close together in here as well, and then do what I'm about to do. And that is going to Object, Envelope, Distort, Make with Mesh. So that's functionality that is already present in Illustrator. I'm just using that functionality. I need enough rows and columns to make it make this work. So if I do preview, what I want is I want squares that or rectangles that are small enough to have enough calculations done by iC3D Suite. And when I say OK, now the previous dialog was from Illustrator. This is the dialog that comes from iC3D Suite that lets me choose which methods, and I'm going to go for front view here, and then I'm going to do apply, and you can see that it does all kinds of weird things to my design. And if I go update and go back to here, you can see that it jumps to something that is actually pretty straight in this case. Right, so that overlaps with, and I'm going to stop it there. I'll finish my last sentence in a second. If you have any questions on what you've seen so far, now would be a very good point in time to ask those. I think there is nothing except from panic about sounds, rightly so. Nothing else. But if you actually. There probably is, and I can't look at them anymore. This is very nice. Okay, just a second. Let me hide this. I'm trying to go to webinar to the point where it will show me the questions. There we go. So if you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. What I was gonna say is that I would have to redo this now for all the elements that need deformation. So in this example, I would probably select this image and then undistort that one. Then I would take these two pieces of text and undistort them together. And then on the back end, this looks pretty good. I might be able to do a little bit on the QR codes. There's a little bit of a skew in here, but it will already work the way it is. Okay, no questions so far that I can see. So beautiful. So what have we done? We've used the shape modeler to create a little tray. Then I've imported an apple, and we've put that apple inside of the little tray, duplicated it 6 times so that we have 6 apples in general. We've made them look different by simply rotating the apple a little bit, applied a shrink, and then on that shrink applied artwork, and then that artwork, again, if you go back to Illustrator and do Object, Envelope Distort, make with Mesh, then you can undistort that element inside of Illustrator, and when you go back to iC3D Suite, you get something that looks undistorted on the actual shrink wrap. So that was the first, and I'm going to quit everything so that we can start looking at the second one. That was the first use case that I wanted to focus on, and without further ado, I'm going to go to the next one, which is this one. And something completely different. We're not going to be using the shape modeler in this one. We'll use 2 other templates, as you'll see. What I am going to do is use the carton fold module that we didn't use for the apples. So iC3D Suite, and we're going to follow the same principle as what we did for the apples, meaning I'm going to create the different parts individually, and then I'm going to combine them together, and along the way I'm going to try and minimize the amount of transformations that I'm using so that iC3D's job is as easy as possible, and my chances on success are as big as possible. Okay. Carton templates, as I said, and again, I have done some preparations. Not much, as you can see, but I do have a tea bag. That's the design for a tea bag. That's the front on the left and the back on the right-hand side there. And then I have the design for the actual package. This is an Illustrator file, but it has been saved with PDF compatibility, so I can see it here in preview. And that's the one that interests me, because the first thing we're going to do is try and make that T package. And I'm going to say import die line. And normally I would tell you to open this in Illustrator, export it as a DXF, and then import it here. But remember when I said that this is an Illustrator file saved with PDF compatibility, so it also works as a PDF, and you can actually use PDF now. So I'm going to simply open that Illustrator file. Not that one, however. You have to keep an eye on what I'm doing here. So that's Illustrator file. The other one was the bag. That's not what we want. We want the package. Now, in that Illustrator file, there are a number of different layers, and that's one of the advantages that you have in using Illustrator or PDF for this instead of DXF. If I wanted to go the DXF route, I would have to open it up in Illustrator, delete everything except for the die line, and then save that as DXF. In this case, I can simply say I'm only interested in the objects that live in the die layer, and I'll import that. Now, I've created this one myself. I followed the same color scheme as iC3D Suite. You don't have to. You just have to know what color the cut lines are and what color the fold lines are. And if I say OK, then it is going to import that. And what is the first thing that I need to do? I need to split lines. If you haven't seen any of the previous webinars, I'm splitting lines so that I can reassign some of these lines as may be necessary. And I'll show you an example of where it is necessary. You can already see that something is not quite right. There is green lines here. There should be a blue outline all around. The cause of that is this little line that needs to be cut. If you want to know more about that, I actually did that webinar about the iC3D version 3.03, and in that one I explained some carton fold mysteries, and actually this was one of the example files that I used. These need to be cut lines, and if you don't make them a cut line, then it is not going to work correctly. Now, my own advice would be to split lines now, but because I know that I haven't done anything that requires splitting lines again, I'm simply going to build the model, and then I can select the fold lines by clicking Command F or Control F on Windows. And then I'm going to set all of those to 90, and that gives me the package. Now, if you want to know why I have this kind of strange thing going on here, it's not too visible, it's not too bad actually. Let me show you, however, if I zoom in on this part here, I should have a very small line and then a larger line. If I set these to linked folds, so folds that are supposed to fold together, I'm going to redo that, this one and then the other side, set that to linked, and then if I do generate model again, the top here looks a little bit better and I don't get any breaks in the carton. Now this one I'm going to set to 45 to open it up, and that will show me that I have these two little strange things here. In the actual package, the idea is that these fold on the outside to keep the lid or the cover in place, but that's kind of annoying to work with the artwork there. So for now, I'm not going to fold these 90 degrees, but I'm going to fold them 180, which puts them on the inside there. And these folds are kind of annoying once we start working with that. So for now, I'm also going to put those at 180. Remember that you can always change that later on. Now, same thing here. Please, before you add model to scene, press save, and that's T. No, I simply want you to go to that folder, please. Thank you. So I'm going to save that. This is a CTD file, which comes from Carton Template Designer. And again, that saves all of the settings that you've done here. And in that case, if you ever need to go back to this package and change something, then that will allow that to you. Once I say add model to scene, I can't do that anymore. So let me press F to see the front view. That is actually where I want it to be. And now to be sure of what happens here, what I could do is go to transform, and in transform, maybe we want to center that. That's fine. If I wanted to, or if I transformed it, rotated it, or scaled it, I could go to reset, and I also have again that bake transforms in there to simplify my model again a little bit. So let's begin by saving this. And I'll call this T package. And of course, at the moment, I don't have artwork on here, and that's not good. So I can actually open or click the Illustrator link. And that gives me, again, two files. And where do these two files come from now? Well, and you have to be a little bit careful about that. There is a front and a back Illustrator file that is opened. They are actually mirrored, which you don't see here because this is a symmetrical design. The front that you see here is the outside of the package. What is called back is the inside of the package. So let me see. We are also opening up T, which is my original one, and then hide the die line. This is front. Let's make this a little smaller. Yes, much better. And now this is the front, the outside view, if you want. I'm going to do Control A, Control C, or Command A, Command C on Mac. Go back to front and paste this in place. And that looks pretty okay from where I'm standing. And then we're going to do the same thing here, but now hide the front or the inside, the outside, and show the inside. Same thing. All, copy. Now we want the back. Paste. And after doing that, we're going to say update iC3D suite. Okay, says up to date. And what that shows you is that package that I wanted. Now, there are a few problems that you can see. One of them is this flap here or this flap there. And if I go to carton options, then I can try to overcome that. So that's the wrong direction, of course. If I fold these a little bit in, it's a cheap trick, but that cheap trick works as well. You can see that I fixed this one already by folding it in. I'm not going to fix the other small problems you have there. I'll leave that as an exercise for you. But otherwise, it's going to take an hour and a half instead of an hour to get through this. What I am going to show is that this is not correct, of course, yet. This blue color that I have here is supposed to be a gold. And in order to fix that, I need to go to Layers. I have one layer which is called Artwork. And if I click here, I can call up the other layer. So these are all the Pantone colors that are used in Illustrator. And I'm going to select Gold. Material should be a gold chrome, that one there, and then OK. And that's going to take a little bit of time with Illustrator because it goes back and front to Illustrator to figure out where that color is used exactly. And then once it's done, it's going to update the preview in iC3D Suite as well. And we can have a look at what it is doing. So it's still updating there. And once it's updated that, we can look at the result in iC3D Suite. And that gives us this gold shine on there. Now, of course, the other thing that I would need to do is do the same thing, but then select this dark blue and change that to gold chrome. And then in the effect, I can make this, give this a bump so that it has an embossing feature as well. Again, exercise for the reader in this case, or the listener in your case. So this is close enough for now. Let me save this, and we'll get on with the next component. This gives us the tea package itself, but as you saw on the screen grab, inside of the tea package there are bags of tea, and the question is, how are we going to do that? Well, I could, of course, again, search for a 3D model and then import that into iC3D Suite, but I don't have to because I have this template library. And in the template library, there is a sachet template. And I'm going to use that one. That actually looks surprisingly much as a tea bag if you look at that. So that has a pretty okay shape for what I want. I'm simply going to adjust the dimensions, which is not difficult. If you know what the size of the box is, you know what size of tea bags you can fit inside. And in this case, I know that I can fit something that is 64 millimeters and then 76 millimeters high. Now, the tea bags that I've seen have this kind of seal at the top. But before I do that, actually, and this is not something that you can know, this is trial and error, but see that this tea bag has a width. Now, if you noticed on the packaging, it says 25 bags inside. If I really want to fit 25 bags into that package, I have to make sure that they're not too wide here And from a little bit of experimentation, I know that 42 is pretty close to what I want. And then I was talking about seals. I want this horizontal seal at the top here. That is this section that just appeared. You can change how that is done. The quality of the rendering will be better once we import it into iC3D Suite. But for the T-bag, the horizontal one is actually the best. And then I also want a tear notch only on the left-hand side. And this is very wide, so I'm going to just a little indication of the fact that there is a tear notch. It would probably be better if it's a little bit higher up. So I'm going to move it up a little bit. The width is okay. So that's the tear notch to tear it open. Locking mechanism we don't need in a T-bag. And remark that you can't save these settings. You cannot. That's not possible. So I don't have to tell you to do that. It's not possible. And I'll simply add this to my scene. There we go. Now I need artwork for this as well, and I could do this through Illustrator, but I'm actually going to do something different. Let me go to Switch Renderer and go to iC3D PDF Renderer instead. See that these buttons have changed to a PDF logo, or logo with PDF on it. And now if I select this and I say PDF, it does the same thing as it did with Illustrator. It opens up the outline of the package that I want, or the artwork that I want. And I can now place the T-bag on there. Now, as I said in a previous webinar, this only works if you just have one-sided artwork. It wouldn't work for the T package, the whole T box, because that box has an outside and an inside artwork, and the PDF editor at this point only supports the outside artwork. But it does support layers, for example. So if you have that same setup with the die line in there and the artwork in there, I could simply filter out the layers that I want in here. And then update iC3D, and when you're happy with that, we say close, and we have our T-bag. Now, because of the fact that we had a template, that was very easy, of course. There is not a lot of work for that. So save as. This is the package. So we're going to call this T-bag and save. I am going to do one more thing and then resave it afterwards. And this has to do with transformations again. If I press the F key or I go to View Front, you can see that this is the way iC3D thinks the front is. And that looks very correct. But remember what we want to build. We want to build this box, and the iC3 suite thinks that the box, this side, is actually to the front of me. So the T-bags that go inside of there are actually turned by 90 degrees. And instead of importing the T-bag and then rotating it then and complicating my life, or iC3D Suite's life in this case, I'm going to select this and go to Rotate. And then I have transform, so the rotation, and then if I rotate that, this is actually how, this is the correct orientation to put them into that box. Watch this, 270, reset, bake transforms, and now it is 0. So that transformation that I've done, again, has been calculated through into the points and meshes of the object, and that means that there is no longer a rotation. It's simply inside of here. And if I now press F, it reverts back to the orientation that I need. So I'm going to save that, and we can get started with assembling the box. Again, same thing, start from scratch. I have my individual components now, and I'm going to start by loading the T package. I could rotate that so that it's correct, and now I'm importing the T bag. Okay. Well, they are slightly different positions, so I probably need to do something about that. Let me check something first before we go on. Yeah, that's okay. So I was checking whether this center carton fold was off, because if it's on, it will impact or it will change the positioning of the carton when I'm working with it or when I'm opening a flap and so on, and I don't want that. So I was just making sure that that is fixed. This thing that you see here, again, that's the same as what we had on the other side, and that we fixed for one of the flaps by simply making the angle 91 degree instead of 90 degrees. That's something that you still need to do here, but I'm not going to go through those steps to save a little time here. What I am going to do is bring this up and push it in. Again, Option allows me to rotate without losing my tool. Yep, that's good. And then I need to push it down. It looks like it's coming through the tea bag a little bit, a tea package a little bit. So like that. I could zoom in to do it a little better, but this gives you an impression. So it's a pretty tight fit. In reality, the tea bags would probably be a few millimeters less tall here to fit a little better in the bag. But in reality, you can also compress them, of course, which is not the case in this model. So that gives us this. The only thing I have to do now, because I want lots and lots of tea bags, is I need to put this in the correct spot. Something like this should do. Okay. And that gives me one bag. And now if I select this and say duplicate, now the question is always how many do you want? And I'm going to take a gamble there and say that it is wide. Remember that we had the tea bag rotated, so we were seeing the side, which would mean that wide is usually in the what is traditionally the X direction. It's parallel with our screen, so it's in this direction. And if we did the right calculations of the measurements, we should be able to fit 25, as it says here on the box as well. So let me see what that gives. Of course, that starts taking a while. This is also where you see that my laptop is not powerful enough anymore. It takes a while because you now have 26 objects in here, and all of these objects have at least one piece of artwork on there, and that starts to take its toll on there. So that is pretty much the same as what we have here, as you can see. And there are some things that we need to clean up. The sides that come through a little bit, so we need to change the angles. But also the embossed gold that we have in the front, we would still need to do that. There is one last thing that I want to show, and that, as you can see here on this high-res image, this actually has a quite nice gold shine to it. But here it's almost white, and the reason for that is that this package is in a lighting environment, of course, and the lighting environment is defined by this panel. And because there is a light, this is very reflective, the gold is very reflective. Because there is a light shining exactly on there, I have a very white reflection, which is not very nice if I want to take a high-res image from there. Now, I could, of course, solve this by rotating the object, but that's not what I want. I want this view on the object. So I don't want to rotate that. Well, there is a little trick that you can do. Of course, I could change the lighting environment, but there is a simpler trick. If I press the S key, S from Simon, that is, and I'm pressing it, you can't see that, but I'm pressing it now and I'm keeping it pressed, then with the mouse, I can drag. And as I drag, you can see that I'm no longer moving the object. If I release the S key and I drag the mouse, I move the object that I have here. If I press the S key and I drag with the mouse, I'm actually rotating the lighting environment around the object, and that allows me to keep the object stationary, but then by playing with that, maybe I want a little bit of detail in there, like some of the darker, it's probably hard to see through GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, but now I have some darker tints in here, reflections in here as well. So by playing with that, by pressing S and dragging the mouse around, you're rotating that lighting environment around the object, and that can help you to find exactly the type of reflection that you want. If you want to show, this is maybe not bad. This is a little bit of a darker shine at the bottom and a lighter shine at the top, and I can do it that way. Okay, that's the last bit of what I wanted to do here as well. So again, if you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. But a little recap, what we've done for this one, to create this one, is we've started actually from the carton fold, and in the carton fold, we imported the die line from this carton fold, cleaned it up a little bit in here, and then made the folded model. And then we used actually the same Illustrator file, which has a outside and inside artwork, to apply artwork to the T package, to the T box that we have here. You can add the gold effect, and I would still have to add the gold emboss effect by playing with the layers palette in iC3D Suite and assigning effects to each Illustrator color that I have. We would still need to fix this thing here, the little problem with the flap, by changing that to 91 and not 90 degrees, so that the material doesn't overlap too much. We saved that. We created a tea bag from the sachet templates in here, adjusted the dimensions, the right seal in there, a tier notch in there, and then with the PDF editor in this case, or the PDF, instead of Illustrator, the PDF editor that's built into iC3D Suite, we applied the other piece of artwork I had for the tea bag, and applied that to there, saved that as well, and then imported that tea bag into the tea box, multiplied it so that we have 25 tea bags in there, and as you can see, they actually fit pretty well. But like I said, that's not something that you can that easily figure out. There is a little bit of trial and error in there. What helps is that if you select a tea bag and you go to transform, you actually get all of the dimensions. So you can see that this one is 5.69 millimeters, and that means that all of the tea bags are 5.69 times 25. That gives you total dimension. You know how big the box is, so in theory you can do the calculations there. In practice, it's often easier to simply do this 2 or 3 times and figure out what the right dimensions are that you want to use. Now that you've done that, we could go into animation and make a little movie out of this, where perhaps the box opens and then a tea bag flies out or something like that. But I took an hour to build these 2 use cases, and that's all I've got today. So it's actually almost perfectly on time. Okay. I can't see any questions in here. Like I said in the beginning, the purpose here was not to show you all of the functionality of iC3D Suite. There are actually webinars, webinar recordings on the website that do a better job at that. So you can go look at any one of those. If you have specific on your if you have specific questions on models that you want to build or things that you want to do, don't hesitate. Just send us a short email, and we will be happy to discuss that or set up a one-on-one go-to-meeting session to do a little bit more of a demo of those specific features. But this should have given you a nice overview of how this works in iC3D Suite, what the different steps are, potentially how long it would take to make things like here. Of course, what I've done here is a little bit scripted in the sense that I have done this a couple times now during a demo, and I know some of the dimensions and so on, but I think it's fair to say that it would perhaps take a little bit longer than what I've done here, but someone who is well versed in iC3D Suite, who's had a little bit of training and who can work with Illustrator pretty well, should have no trouble replicating what I've done, and it probably wouldn't take that much longer to do it either. It's pretty intuitive to do all of these things, as long as you keep to a number of basic guidelines, save each of the components that you build, use this bake transforms to make sure you don't have too many transformations in the same object, and so on and so on. So there are a number of those guidelines that you have to keep in mind, but other than that, the application is very intuitive to work with. Good. This was the, if I'm not mistaken, second summer school webinar. There is another one next week. If you're interested in that one, it is about Tucana quality control. If you're interested in that one, please subscribe, but take care to note that next week's webinar is on Thursday and not on Wednesday. It's the only webinar this summer that is on a Thursday. It's my fault. I'm in Berlin on Wednesday. My apologies for that. But make sure that you show up the right day, which is a Thursday. The subjects of all of the webinars are on our website. Please go have a look at what they all are. You can subscribe to all of them. Of course, all of them are free, and all of them will take just about an hour time. Once the recording is uploaded and finished, you'll get an email notifying you of that. And then the only thing that rests me that I have to do is to thank you very much for joining. Again, a pleasure to see so many people sacrifice their summer to come listen to a webinar. Thank you for joining. Hope to see you all in one of the next webinars or multiple next webinars, and have a really great rest of your day. Till next time.